Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Live. Now, US President Biden and China's President Xi had their first call since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. To break down what came of it, I'm joined by David Shullman, Atlantic Council's Global China Hub Senior Director. Thank you for joining us today. Now, I want to first get your insights on what stood out to you from this 2-hour call between these two leaders and whether or not it actually moved the needle on Ukraine.
Well, it doesn't seem like at this point it did move the needle, at least according to the readout that we now have from the Chinese side. We do not, as of now, have a readout from the U.S. side. The Chinese readout indicated no real change in China's stance on Ukraine and the crisis that we're watching unfold there. There was mention of the need for the U.S. and China to collectively contribute to peace and tranquility, as the Chinese put it. But there was no mention of Russia being in any way to blame for what's happening, despite the fact that, of course, we're looking at an unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And in fact, in the readout that I saw, there wasn't even any mention of Russia in the Chinese readout. And while at the same time, then you had the Chinese repeating some of the things they've said in the past about the United States and NATO being, at least in part, to blame for what we're watching unfold, and that the United States and NATO need to come to the table and negotiate with Russia to address some of, as China's put it in the past, Russia's legitimate security concerns that China claims have led to the situation that we find ourselves in. From the Biden administration's perspective, I think there was a hope that we would see at least some movement. I think President Biden went in there wanting to get some movement, at least from Xi Jinping, in terms of his willingness not to support Russia or to blunt the effects of the very strong Western sanctions that have been placed on Russia, and maybe even to get the Chinese to commit to some sort of use of leverage over Russia to change their calculus. But not surprisingly, that's not what we seem to have had unfold.
So this is a very interesting balancing act. I mean, what's at stake for the U.S. and its relationship with China, depending on how they navigate Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
Well, for the United States, I mean, what we are hoping to have happen here is to have China recognize that it has a choice that it has to make at this point, whether it wants to side with a country that is, undertaking a brutal invasion of a sovereign nation, or whether it wants to side with most of the global community in recognizing Russia's very clear culpability in this situation and doing all it can to stop it. And from China's point of view, that's not possible because their strategic drivers lead them to want to partner with Russia. They view Russia as their most important strategic partner. They view the United States as their most important strategic adversary and rival. And so from the Chinese perspective, despite the fact that they're now shifting their messaging on the crisis and trying to look more neutral, trying even to position themselves as potential mediators, it's very clear that at the end of the day, China tilts towards Russia and may end up supporting Russia and helping to blunt the effects of sanctions. From the United States perspective, I think this move is a good one, this effort to try to negotiate this call that just happened, because there, I guess, was some outside possibility that maybe you get some movement from China, which would have been fantastic, because then you actually potentially get a commitment to not undermine the effects of sanctions. If it doesn't work, as it appears it didn't, then what you get is a very clear indication to the rest of the world, and especially to our European allies, that the United States has done what it can to try to engage diplomatically with China, to try to pull China along to act responsibly, but that China has chosen a different path. And part of what we want to do, I think, what the administration wants to do, is to have the allies, the European allies, on side to pressure China and to push China to be more responsible in this instance.
So then I want to see how you characterize this relationship, because even before the invasion of Ukraine, the US and China obviously still embroiled in a trade war that's still ongoing, hasn't really progressed beyond that phase one trade deal. And you also then had COVID and supply chain issues, which highlighted the role of globalization between the two countries. Now, we are getting some word from the White House in their statement saying that the two leaders did agree on maintaining open lines of communication and as well as managing competition between their two countries. How would you characterize this current relationship?
Well, I think it's very clearly gotten much more tense, and it's gotten, it's become rather fraught. I think from the Chinese side, they had hoped that once the Biden administration came in, some of the direction in which the relationship was heading under the Trump administration would be shifted, that there would be a reset, to use an oft-used term. But the Biden administration came in committed to understanding that there were genuinely a lot of places in the relationship with China where we needed to be more confrontational, more adversarial, and that we would cooperate and engage with China when it was in the United States' interest and when it served our mutual interests on issues such as climate change and on the pandemic, if possible. And so what we've seen is, however, the Chinese side has been really resistant to engaging and cooperating in an environment where the U.S. side is pressing China on its atrocities in Xinjiang, issues around China's increasing aggression in East Asia, and of course, in this situation where China is very clearly not playing a role of a responsible rising great power, which is what Beijing claims to be, right? Beijing claims to stand for a more democratized international relations, a system where China would not support interference and violations of sovereignty, and where China stands for peace and stability. And what we see very clearly is that when push comes to shove, China will side with its partner, Russia. And so I think it puts the United States in a position where, despite, I think, this administration's good intentions to engage and to maintain those lines of communication, and we do want to continue to maintain those lines and to talk potentially around crisis issues, if anything were to happen around Taiwan and things like that, it's become more and more obvious that China is not willing to engage in a good faith effort.